Remember the Forgotten.
Chapter 13. Lightning Strikes. Zircon? Aurora asked again, watching his wide-eyed expression under the moonlight. Many seconds had passed since he lowered the gem from his face, but he had yet to speak a word. "Please, tell me you remember me," she begged, emotion beginning to choke her voice again. Zircon met her eyes. His own betrayed a feeling of confusion, perhaps azzlement, but Aurora supposed that was to be expected. "I do," Zircon finally replied hastily. I remember everything." "Really?" asked Aurora, a tentative smile on her face. "You remember who you are? Your past?" He nodded in reply, but, strange to Aurora, he was not smiling. Zircon gritted his teeth beneath his facade. How had he let himself get into this mess? How had this lie gotten so out of hand? He cursed himself, unable to believe that moments ago, and for the past few days, he had been foolish enough to believe that he was someone else entirely. He knew who he was now, though. He knew all too well. And yet, Zircon's memories of the past few days were filled with so many thoughts and feelings he wasn't used to, so many things he thought he could never have said or done, that some part of him still felt different from before. Before, he was ready to run away and to leave Aurora at the curb. Now he couldn't. He didn't know why, but he just couldn't. What's wrong?" asked Aurora once again, concerned. "Is something missing? I don't understand." "No, everything's fine," Zircon assured her. I think we should get out of this forest. That woman could come back any minute, not to mention that monstrous thing." "Yes, you're right," Aurora agreed. She looked upset still, but more hopeful than before. Not letting the darkness of the night get the best of them, the pair began to make their way through the woods once more. When the sun rose the next morning, Aurora and Zircon stumbled through the leafy shadows of the brightly lit, vibrant forest. They were exhausted, physically and emotionally. Barely a word exchanged between them while they trudged their way along the crunchy earth, past the chirping birds and rustling trees. They had no direction, only hoping that chance would happen them upon something, a light, a hope, or at the very least, a road to follow. When the trees finally began to thin and the long dirt road ahead of them came into sight, Aurora was relieved. Zircon didn't know how to feel. "Let's head back to Hillmaven then," she suggested, rubbing her eyes. "At least we'll have somewhere to rest while we try to figure it all out." Zircon bit his lip. Could he afford to do that? Could he possibly keep up the deception in the midst of a town he doesn't belong in? He reached into his pocket to feel the large gem within, a gem that would be worth more gold than he could imagine. Perhaps, with this, he could make it into a reality. It wasn't long after they began walking up the road that the faint sound of hooves clip-clopping against the ground came into focus behind them. Trotting up the path and catching up with their walking pace, the two of them slowed, cautiously stepping to the side of the road as it approached. Soon enough, the figure rounded a bend and came into sight, slowly riding closer as the pair watched him. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with dark skin and woolly black hair held up by a headband into a strangely vertical shape. He wore a bright green tunic and long black trousers, sat upon a horse coloured a pale brown. The man slowed to a gentle stop just as he rode up alongside the duo, staring at them somewhat quizzically. "Are you two all right?" he asked. Zircon and Aurora looked between each other warily. Zircon gazed upon the stranger with uncertainty, but eventually broke the silence. "We're fine," he stated. "It sure doesn't look like it," the man observed, eyeing the upset still visible on Aurora's face. "What's the trouble?" "I said we're fine," Zircon repeated through gritted teeth. The stranger didn't seem content to take his word for it. We've been Forgetting things, Aurora finally admitted, looking up to the man with tragic eyes. A lot of things. The man's own eyes widened at that, and he sucked in a slow breath before carefully swinging his leg over his horse and landing heavily onto the ground. Standing before them, he gestured vaguely as he softly spoke. You two haven't experienced anything odd recently, have you? Depends who's asking, replied Zircon, crossing his arms and narrowing his eyes distrustfully. The tall man looked slightly taken aback, but then merely shook his head and smiled. They call me Lightning. I'm an adventurer of sorts. Are you after that woman? Asked Aurora, a slight hope in her tone. The man looked back at her with an intrigued expression, but he did not answer the question. Look, he began, I'm working for a man who's been investigating something like this for quite a while. I'm sure he would love to meet you two. Would it be all right if I were to escort you both to Machiavel? Yes, that would be great, Aurora agreed almost immediately, clearly relieved at the thought of her uncertainty falling away. Wait, blurted out Zircon in response. He leaned in close to Aurora's ear and whispered to her, Are you sure we can trust him? Aurora didn't reply, simply looking toward her new friend happily. It's settled then, Lightning said, climbing back on his horse. Away we go! That night, the sky was filled with stars once more, as the two travellers and their new companion set up a small camp underneath the leaning tree trunks of a small roadside spot. The fire crackled and spewed embers into the air, as Lightning threw on wooden logs and branches, thick enough to warm them through the night. As the moon rose higher and the owls began their midnight rain, the exhausted Aurora fell into a quick slumber under the dark gloom of the clearing's edge. Zircon, meanwhile, still sat upright on his bedroll beside the fire, warming his hands within its heated aura. Having just finished tidying up his horse and unrolling his bedding, the man known as Lightning stepped over to the cosy fire as well, and lowered himself to sit beside him, joining in warming his hands with its heat. Is something on your mind, my friend? He asked, watching Zircon's dour expression gaze into the flames. Only staying up late and staring into the fire tends not to reflect a happy state of mind. Zircon sat silent for many seconds, his thoughts seeping away into the red and orange void. I've been lying to her, he practically whispered, too tired to hold the truth captive any longer. Lightning raised an eyebrow and glanced briefly around him before turning to Zircon again. What about? He asked. She thinks I'm a nobleman, Zircon admitted, letting the words drift into the air with the fleeting embers. Lightning was silent for a moment before he continued his questions. And, without being rude, he began, how did that end up happening? Even I believed it was the truth until last night, answered Zircon. Oh? Inquired Lightning. How come? A small, emotionless smile creeped up on Zircon's lips at the near laughability of it all. I forgot that it was a lie. I see, replied Lightning, nodding sympathetically, although it was clear he didn't really understand the situation. And do you care about her? Zircon's expression saddened as he lowered his head downcast. Yes, but she won't care about me if I tell her the truth. Don't be so sure, Lightning told him, smiling and shaking his head softly. In my experience, there ain't much noble about being a nobleman anyway. Being an honest man, on the other hand, I reckon, is quite admirable. He patted Zircon on the back, then rose to his feet, and quietly walked towards his bedding. Zircon sighed deeply, curling up beside the fire, and eventually falling aslumber in its warm embrace. The next morning, the glaring sun forced Zircon from his sleep and back onto the road. The remainder of the journey was short and quiet. The forest lit brightly and warmly by the morning sun, gentle beams shining up the path ahead of them until they finally arrived at their destination. The long cobbled road leading into the village was bustling underneath the bright and clear blue sky, with many denizens rising from rest to go about their days. The sounds of crashing hammers and rolling carts filled their ears, and the sun beat down on the tiled rooftops, leaving barely an ounce of shade as far as the eye could see. Lightning wiped sweat from his brow as he dismounted his horse and began to lead it across the street towards a large 2-story building which appeared to be the tavern, branded the Drinking Demon by the signage overhead. Aurora and Zircon simply followed behind him as he tied up his horse in an adjacent stable and then led them inside. Bright light streams clawed their way in through the windows of the large room, stopping short of the scattered tables and leaving the rest of the otherwise unlit tavern dim but even. Still, in the morning hours, the place was near abandoned, save for a couple drunks passed out in the corners and a more notable group of 3 seated at a table near the stairs. A man with messy red hair tied roughly into a headband sat with a flagon of ale in his hand, besides a woman with blue hair seemingly lost in thought. The final figure appeared to be a very young man, almost boyish, wearing a large brown cloak with a rope tied around the arm, leading to a thick book resting open in front of him. "Hey all," Lightning said, giving them a friendly, beaming smile as he stepped towards them. "How did you get on without me?" "We're doing all right," said the blue-haired woman, giving him a smile and a nod before turning in her chair to face Aurora and Zircon. "And who might these 2 be?" Lightning smiled and opened his arms widely to gesture to the 2 newcomers. "Everyone, I'd like you to meet Zircon and Aurora. I think you'll be quite pleased with what they have for us." As Lightning encouraged the 2 to approach the table and take a seat, the others began to introduce themselves. "I'm Sapphire," said the blue-haired woman. "It's nice to meet you." The red-haired man nodded to them in turn. "You can call me James." The last of them then, finally, looked up from his book, looking somewhat anxious as he greeted them. Hi," he managed. "I'm Samuel." As Aurora and Zircon took the seats across from the other 3, Lightning remained standing, gazing over his gathered companions with a look of pride as a few moments passed in silence. "Returning to the point, Paz," came Sapphire. "Why are these 2 here?" Zircon suddenly perked up and tilted his head, staring up at Lightning with narrowed eyes. "Paz? I thought you went by Lightning." Paz gave Zircon a sideways smile. "It's just a name I use on the road, but now we're acquainted, you can call me Pazley. Paz for short." "It's nice to meet you, Paz," smiled Aurora. "Properly, that is, and the rest of you as well." While Sapphire still looked on expectantly, Pazley tilted his head and finally turned towards his friends with a slightly more serious expression. "To answer your question, Saf," he began, "these folks have been having some trouble with their memories." Samuel sat up straight in his chair, suddenly attentive, then stared at the 2 newcomers. "Oh, you have?" Aurora nodded in confirmation, causing the boy to smile excitedly. With an eager hand, he opened his book up wide and lifted his quill. "Please, tell me everything,"